Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a Public Works podcast. My name is Joseph Blackman, and today I got a real treat for you. His name is Paul Gagliardo, and he is the host of the Water Entrepreneur podcast. Paul, say what's up to everybody.
Hey, Joe, how's it going? Everything's going good down here in Southern California. We're avoiding the fires, so we're safe.
Okay, good stuff. Good to hear, man. So, your title, host of the Water Entrepreneur podcast. You know, with the guy with your season, I don't want to say age, because with your seasonality, you've been at this for some years. I'm sure there's a lot more under that iceberg. But let's start off with the Water Entrepreneur podcast. Talk about that, and then we'll dive in deeper into the lore, the backstory of Paul.
Sure, no worries. So during COVID, we all had a lot of time on our hands, right? And so I was just kicking around, and I said, well, let's start a podcast. And I had been doing a lot of work with water entrepreneurs, startup founders. And what I realized is that they all had the same questions. They all had the same holes in their knowledge base. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to get their stories out and also become kind of a virtual mentoring platform so that I could ask the founders questions, I could answer some of them, they could get their stories out, and then other founders could listen and, kind of get some information that they might not otherwise get. And besides getting out their technology stories, so that was the genesis of it. I was able to obtain a couple of sponsors. And matter of fact, just finished recording episode 100, which will be posted in a couple of weeks. So we try to post every week. Doesn't quite work that way. We've been doing it for about 2.5 years. But it's really fun. It's really fun talking to folks. And some people ask me, said, don't you think you'll run out of guests? And it's like, nope. No, yeah. There's plenty. That is not a problem.
I'm biased. Of course, we're on a podcast. I've got this podcast, and you have a podcast, so we're going to talk a little bit of podcasts here. How tactically, because I host a podcast, which means I ask the interviewee questions. There's, of course, they call it imposter syndrome, or just that little bug in the back of my brain that says it's not my show. I'm having somebody on my show. So how do you navigate asking the questions, but also adding value? And again, like, I'm sure you know your way around the barn. So like sharing your knowledge and your, anecdotes and not feeling like you're taking up the space or hogging the show.
That is one of the, I don't want to say most difficult, but something I have to keep tabs on because I have a million stories. And what I have to keep reminding myself is the guest, it's about the guest. It's not about me. And so as I ask them questions, sometimes things will come up where I feel like I can add some value or context by telling a story. To be real honest, sometimes the interviews are kind of not progressing the way I would like them to, the way I planned them out. And so I feel like I needed to add something in to either add some bulk to it or to kind of move it on another direction. Another interesting thing is that as I'm interviewing people and I have a question to ask, I can tell by their eyes if they're thinking, if they need time to compose an answer. And if they do, I'll keep talking for a little while longer. Do you have the same experience?
It's funny because I never sought out to be like a podcaster. Like, I'm an entrepreneur on my own. I have a startup in the space, and I'm thinking, like, in podcasting is, again, I'm biased. I think every salesman, every manufacturer should have their own podcast. Whether you get 50,000 downloads or 500 or 50, the message that you can curate and put out to your community is second to none. So I think, again, everybody should have their own podcast. But having done over 300 something shows, you start to develop micro skills. And like you said, just learning when people, and you're asking the questions, you can tell they don't understand the question, rephrasing it, pulling more out of people. That's one of the things. Like, I'm sure you've done shows where you ask them a question, they give you a 1 sentence answer. You're like, dude, this show's gonna be done in 7 minutes. Like, give me more. And then again, like, I like to listen to a lot of sports podcasts of former athletes who are interviewing. It could be current athletes or also former athletes. But I can't stand how the former athlete always tries to outshine the current athlete. It's like, dude, you're having him on your show. Let him talk. Like, we don't, we like you. We want to hear from him. So skillfully navigating that is tough. Water, it's a space that, like, you're probably not going to get 20 billion downloads. So how do you how do you keep it fun, or do you even not care if, like, the average listener or the average person, like your neighbor next door, do you care if they listen to it or not?
Yeah, I do. And so what I try to come at it with is something for different parts of my audience. So one of the things I look to do is bring in what I call the origin story of the founder. Why did they get into the business? Why did they get into the water business? Why did they start a company? Did they have any mentors or muses, people that influenced them? And so I try to get their backstory as well as their technical story, because that's the main purpose of the podcast. And then also the business story, raising funds, business models, those kinds of things. And so I try to weave all of those things together, and kind of make it somewhat entertaining. My wife has listened to most of my podcast.
Good for her.
I
We need to
appreciate
put
it.
our wives together.
Yeah. And she will give me feedback. And sometimes she's like, oh, that was kind of boring. I wasn't really interested. And then sometimes when people talk a lot about themselves, she really gets engaged. And then she listens more to the technical side and gets a better feeling if she likes the person. So it's an interesting angle. And I find I have about, I would say 15% of the people who listen are, just not technical, not water people.
Yeah.
And so but I also find that is very interesting. I also find it extremely interesting, just to understand the guts it takes to just start a business. I didn't start a business till I was 68 years old. I obviously didn't have the guts to do it. I worked for other people. So I find all of those things extremely interesting, and you'll find some just fascinating stories about where people came from, and they left Argentina and moved to India when they were 17 years old. I was like, how do you do that? It's like you got to have a brass set, right? And so it's just, to me, it's fascinating. People's backstories.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also cool talking to you because you've had entrepreneurs on your show, and I'm a fan of data. I like to collect data from those who have the data. So I'm sure you have a pretty decent data set. There's a couple things I want to ask you about the entrepreneurs or the startup founders that come on your show. Would you say some, most, all, none come from a bigger company and said, hey, I can find or I can plug this hole with a gift, skill, or talent, or a product or a service? Or are they from outside the industry, and then get into the water industry?
I would say 90% have no experience in the water industry at all.
Really?
To begin with, they have developed intellectual property, or they worked in academia, or they were, something else. For some reason, they found their way into this business. Most do not come from bigger companies and kind of, if you will, downsize into this. I don't see that either. Yeah, it's fascinating. Like now, we're getting a lot of data scientist type people, AI, kind of, those kinds of things. So they're coming from that view and just applying it to the water business. The other thing that's interesting is I find that as issues become part of the public kind of knowledge base, people will develop a solution. So, you have like PFAS, right? That's the new big thing. And so people will have a technology or know about a technology or develop one, say in the university work, and then go right to that. Now microplastics has become a big thing. And so you're starting to see a lot of people figure out how to monitor for microplastics and kind of remove them from water or from air. And so they're developing those things. You've got a lot of people in the atmospheric water generation business, making water from air in various ways. So a lot of the entrepreneurs I run into really start from a need in the industry, and two, a feeling that they want to do service and they want to do good, and they find that the water business is a place that, I don't want to say it's underserved, but there's certainly a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. Speaking of opportunity, in sports betting, which I don't advise anybody to get into, but a buddy of mine has a good tip. He says, bet with your head, not with your heart. Because of course you think your team is going to win. Of course you could, place your mortgage on your team and you're going to win it right off into the sunset. It never happens that way. Most bettors end up, anyways. in the startup culture, it's a bet. You're taking a bet on yourself or on your product or service that it will pay out. What would you they say follow your passion, or and that's how you get into something. I'm a firm believer that you should follow the money, but bring your passion. What do you think about those who are trying to save the world and they're so passionate about water that they miss the certain things that have to do with running a business? Or do you think that they should follow their passion and do what they love and see if it pans out in that regard?
It's a two-edged sword. One of the things I always ask the founders is, say they're a technical person. I said, did you start it by yourself or did you start with a team? And I find that the ones that tend to be a little more successful start with at least one partner, a business partner, or realize right away they need a business partner. Sometimes the technology takes many years to really develop, and so it's all technical people. They're not selling anything, in the first 2-3 years, and then when they finally start to sell something, then they need to be a business partner on the whole exercise of working with venture capital companies or private equity firms. It is one of the most interesting things that I talk to them about, because most of them have zero experience with that. And then the whole business model issue. And one of the things I do talk to them about, once they're started, is that the founder's role has to change as the business grows. So if you're a one-person show, that's one thing. If all of a sudden you're selling $1 million worth of product and you have a business person, you have a salesperson, a marketing person, those kind of things, all of a sudden you're not doing everything. And so you have to take a step back. You have to decide, you have to understand what your role is going to be going forward. And I find some folks have a hard time with that. And some folks get it, and they're willing to take a step back. And then it becomes hiring the right person.
Yeah.
And that is really interesting. But to answer your question, I think you need the passionate people are the ones that are willing to put the time and energy in. And I think that is totally critical. I will say that sometimes people's babies are ugly.
Ouch.
Well, I'm not in the business to, well, I should say I'm not in the business to make friends, but I'm in the business to be honest.
Yeah.
And if something is a perpetual motion machine, I'm going to say, look, it's a perpetual motion machine. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
Or yeah, you have an interesting product, but you're selling to the wrong folks. You got to change your marketing approach. And I kind of have no problem telling people that, in my consulting side.
Yeah.
On the podcast side, I'm the happy interviewer, but on the consulting side, my job is to help them be successful.
Sure.
And that's part of it, is understanding, what you've got and why would somebody want to buy it. And you have to have all those pieces of the puzzle. But the bottom line is, the passion is critical. You startup founders, work 24/7, and they have to, I think, to make a go. But then they have to be willing to pivot, and they have to be honest as things are going along. So it's extremely difficult. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I'm not going to ask too many tactical questions because I don't want you to send me an invoice. But let's get into Paul's backstory. I want to know, like when you see when you see the soup, you want to know what's all in it. So give us the backstory of Paul. What got you into this position? And then I hate to say it, but like what qualifies you to speak to startup founders and help them with with their ugly babies?
So I've been in the water business for maybe 35 or so years. I have a degree in mechanical engineering, and I'm a registered engineer. I have a master's in public health, so I worked in the solar energy business for a few years. Then I went to work in government, public works, and found my way into the water and wastewater business back in the early 90s. And one of my first projects was to do the research work and the testing to convince the state of California that you could successfully and safely make sewage directly into drinking water. And so that's where I cut my teeth, not only in the water business, but in the new technology business, because the technology didn't exist, or at least it wasn't documented to prove that it could do this work. And so I developed a research center at the city of San Diego. We tested many, many kinds of products, membrane systems, advanced oxidation systems, monitoring systems. And so that's where I first learned about, I'll call it the new technology game, and what it takes to prove that a piece of technology works. And then also that it provides value. So that was in the 90s. I then went to work for a startup. I went to work for a multinational engineering company. And then in 2009, became the innovation director at American Water. So American Water is the largest public utility or private utility in the United States. And so my job was to find cool new stuff that could add value to American Water, to add value to the enterprise. And it had to be cool because everybody was really busy. And if it wasn't cool, you couldn't get anybody's attention. If it wasn't new, people would have already seen it and already have a perception about it. And usually that perception, if they weren't already using it, it was low. So you had to get back to zero before you could start building the positive perception. And then it had to work and add value at the end of the day. So that was kind of my mantra. And I would talk to, I'd give everybody I'd say I talk to 10, 15, at least 20 people a week.
Wow.
I give them 15 minutes and say, look, give me your pitch. I said 90% of the time I'll never talk to you again because what you got either doesn't fit or whatever. I said, but I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste my time either. And because you had the funnel started really big, and it very quickly became smaller. And we were able to introduce some treatment systems, software products, and various things to American Water during the 9 years I worked for them. And so that was another place where that's all I did was talk to startup founders. And I'm also a judge for Imagine H2O, which is a kind of a startup accelerator platform based in the Bay Area. They started in 2009, so I think I'm the only OG, original judge that has been doing it ever since 2009. And so we see 20 to 100, pre-vetted startups during that, every year during that program. And so I get a pretty good idea of what's out there. And now the podcast. Most of the people I interview are fairly early stage technology companies. So okay. I've been tracking new technologies for more than 30 years, as I say, you have to be you can't be an expert in everything, right? But you can be a jack of all trades and a master of some. So I'm a master of a couple of technologies, but I know a little bit about everything.
Yeah. You know what? I do think that there is a comeback story of the generalist. For so many years, everybody's talking about specialize. I do think generalists are making our way back, baby.
I absolutely agree, and it's I envy the people who in the engineering world that all they've done is design treatment plants for 40 years and they know everything about it, and those people are fascinating, but to me it's very narrow, and I like to change up what I do every 4 or 5 years, and if I may, right now I'm in the process of pitching a streaming educational docuseries to the Netflix, Amazon Prime. We're in negotiations, discussions right now about water. Wow. And so we are preparing the sizzle reel and the pitch deck, and we'll be going to them hopefully in March. With the proposal. We have a 6 show proposal we're putting together to talk about water issues of the day, whether it's rising seawater temperatures, whether it's bottled water, whether it's day zero in various large cities, whether it's like removing dams on the Klamath River and restoring the natural and wild rivers. These big overdrafting groundwater basins. There's a million of them. So that's the next.
Wow.
That's my next reincarnation. Is to be a TV star.
But you know what? Like, we'll go into that. But I got a couple more questions leading up to that. But I love how you keep throwing irons on the fire. Like you said, reinventing yourself. There's so many people I see that they're in the same position, same field, and they get stale. Like, I get it. Like, you keep doing the same thing every day. But until you have a new passion product or a new North Star, like you said, you get re-energized and you're like, I can take all the gifts, skills, and talents I learned in the last 40 years and I could apply it to this now. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, which I love. The American Water, you were kind of I would say the barrier to entry for a lot of these startups, a lot of these companies. A couple questions around that. I've learned that there's a lot of I would say looky-loos, and not looky-loos, but a lot of copycats in the industry. These companies, they go to China, they all buy the same one or two pieces of product, they just slap their logo on it, whether it's a crawler, whether it's a nozzle, whether it's a vac truck or whatever. How much of that did you see? And then, like, I hate to say it, could you see it coming before you actually had the meeting and say, hey, we saw this last week, it's just under this title and not that title?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I found it easy to tell when you're starting to talk to people. I had a series of questions, that I felt I could get to the bottom of things fairly quickly. One is I would ask where the intellectual property came from and if they own the intellectual property. And if they didn't own it or they didn't have any, then you dig a little bit deeper and say, well, okay, well, so where's this coming from? And then you could get a pretty good feeling if they had control over the product development or not. But most of the time, I would say that the products that people pitched me were unique. They were not, white labeled from some other place. That was typically not. And I think because I was always curious to find something that did not exist. That was one of the things.
You were searching a long time for that.
Well, I still am in a couple of areas. But that was always my thing. If it was a common, thing, product, services, that was fine. I'd pass it off to somebody. But the things that interested me, one of the things you mentioned before, follow the money. So that was always an angle I would talk to people about. With Watergate, I said, in Watergate, the mantra was follow the money, and that led you to the source of the issue. And so what I did in American Water is I looked at where we spent the most money and why. And then I looked for solutions to help us lower that cost. So whether it was, a type of pipe, whether it was a different type of water meter, those were the places where we spent a lot of money. If we could switch out product A for product B, and it would do the same thing or better job, and it cost me 10% less money, I was ahead of the game, which doing nothing almost. It's just a matter of finding the right product. So that was how I went about things. And like I said, sometimes things didn't exist. Back in 2009, everybody wanted to do, big data management. We had a big meeting with IBM, but our data wasn't structured in such a way that they could do anything with it. So we would have to structure the data before we could analyze the data. And so that was a big stumbling block to getting into that at that point in time.
Yeah, most supervisors, directors that I'm pitching to are, I would say, a extended arm of a U, meaning they were that gatekeeper to new products and service because they want to operate more efficiently. They want their team to be safer. They want their team to produce more. And so they're always looking for certain product services that can help their teams out. What will you say to them if they're listening to this episode? Like some of those questions they should ask, some of the, I guess, the methodologies in finding a new product or service that could fit within their department.
So I would say that don't look for the big, huge solution that's going to solve your biggest problem. Look for solutions that will solve a problem. Start there. You don't have to, solve a little piece, day one. So, think about the kinds of things that, cause angst among your team. and then look for solutions to that. So I think you need to listen to the rank and file, listen to your folks, and have in your back pocket, hey, if I could find something that did this, if I could find something that did that. I remember one thing really simply was a different method for popping a manhole cover, that would put less strain on people's back.
There's a different way. What? Yeah.
Really straightforward. And actually what happened was in American Water, one of the field guys, they developed, a clever little thing that, that did that. So, but it's that kind of stuff that really, I think, makes a big difference. And then from a manager's perspective, gets the staff on board that you're trying to help them, and not trying to take their job away. You're not trying to impose your will on them. You want to give them tools that will allow them to do their job better. And I think that is something that folks need to be really kind of cognizant towards. I think the other thing is that when you find a gatekeeper, if you're on the entrepreneur side, the first thing is it's hard to find the gatekeeper. I call them the innovation champion. That can be really difficult sometimes. But when you find them, instead of talking about, how beautiful your baby is right away, find out from them what their interest is, what their pain points are, and then try to weave your story and your pitch around their particular issues. I think, listening, part of the passion is that you want to talk about what you've got. And sometimes you got to take a step back and just
That's so hard to do.
It's so hard to do, but you got to do it, and you got to listen.
Yeah.
And then give them what they want, or what they need, and be willing to accept a no and move on. If you're on the entrepreneur side. And the issue with, folks in utilities is they have so many problems, so many things that could be solved. I think it's really, for me, was always useful to delegate those interactions to other folks, experts in the field, people that are doing the work, and say, look, hey, talk to this guy, talk to this person. They have an interesting product. And I remember one time this one firm pitched me on a method of algae control using ultrasonic waves. And I was like, boy, that sounds really crazy. And when I started asking around internally, the guys that ran the reservoirs were like, hell yeah, I want that.
Really? Yeah.
And I was like, it was the last thing I thought was just anybody.
But they had the pain, yeah.
But they had a big pain point. A lot of algae in these reservoirs. They were throwing copper sulfate at it and this and that, and lots of chemicals. And we implemented this particular solution, and it cleaned up the water so fast, that people were shaking their heads. It was really quite an interesting technology. But the point is it didn't make any sense to me, but it made sense to somebody else.
Yeah.
And that's, so as an innovation champion or a gatekeeper, you got to listen to your people, and you got to listen to the entrepreneurs. And then, you're a matchmaker. You're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together, put the folks together that have a common interest, and then they can determine if there's something there that's worth trying.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. How much weight equity did you put on? The question I always get is, well, who else have you done this for? References, case studies. When you're brand new, it's kind of like that dichotomy at work. Hey, we need you to have experience, but you're like, I need to work to have experience. So how much equity weight do you put on that when you were making those decisions?
I always love to be first.
Really? Not everybody's like you.
Most people want to be second or third. I love to be first. I did. at least from an intellectual perspective, talk to folks about their product. So I'll give you an example. Back in 2015, I ran into a company that said they can detect leaks in water pipe from space, using synthetic aperture radar. And I was like, wow, okay, how does that work? And so they went through the science, they went through all that, and it's like, okay, I get it. It seems it's technically feasible. So I was the first one to bring them to the United States and do a pilot test at one of our utilities, and it worked great. And I'm still working for them, 10 years later, as a consultant. But the point is that, and we spent the first 5 years just trying to convince people that it worked because it seems so outrageous. But it was the same technology they used to look for water on Mars, right? So it wasn't, they just turned the satellites around and shot the radar towards Earth.
Makes sense.
But even though it really had very little proof of concept at that point in time, there was enough technical viability from the scientist, from the founder, and he proved to me that this was worth taking a chance on. And so, yeah, I love being first. Being first is great.
Okay, I like it. I love your Wednesday water minutes or your Wednesday. No unsolicited advice, but keep it up because short form video crushes. It kills. You're gonna like even the stuff that I do, like it starts to take off after a while. You might not see too much traction at first, but just keep it up, man. I applaud your efforts in that.
Thank you.
But speaking of being a movie star, Netflix, this is huge. I love a big hairy gorilla goal, that you're trying to take on. It's hard to do. It's hard to execute on. Let's say you get the pilot shot and it doesn't make Netflix. You can shop this around to every association. You'll still, be the guy, or you'll still attain what you're trying to set out to do. Tell us the why behind something like that. And then also the logistics, the nitty gritty, what you're going through, what you're seeing, what it feels and smells like trying to get a show on Netflix.
So what I find, so you watch the news, I still read a newspaper. Most people don't. You doom scroll and you read a 2-minute thing on the computer. Most of the information we get is in very short form. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. And so, you'll hear ocean water temperatures are increasing. The coral reefs are dying. And that's all you hear. You don't get anything else. And so what I wanted to do was, so the working title of the show is Beneath the Surface, is to do a deeper dive into these issues that are affecting everybody, and explain why not necessarily why they're happening, but what's the impact? What's the impact to people? What's the impact to the environment? What's the impact to industry? Across the board, and get people's kind of feedback on kind of what's going on, why is it happening, what kind of solutions might there be? When we were talking to the streaming services, at first we had suggested a half-hour show, and they said, no, we want an hour. We want hour-long episodes. Like, okay. And they really liked these ideas, bottled water. Why do people drink bottled water? I did a Wednesday water on that, and it turned out that the first bottled waters were sold for medicinal purposes. This is good for you. It was like sparkling water from Perrier Springs or someplace like that, right? And so it was like a snake oil salesman almost back in the day. And that's how that was back in the 1840s, something like that. So it's just the origin of like bottled water. Why? So it's really to get people to understand these bigger issues of the day, focused on water. Also, from what we learned, documentaries, because they are fairly low cost to produce, and are the fastest growing segment of the TV business right now. I know that's not the right term, but it's easy for me to say that. And so there's a lot of interest in that kind of programming, and there's nothing specifically on water. So all of those things together made it interesting for us to pitch, and then interesting for the streaming services to be considerate, consider showing them. What's interesting, so most of the time as a podcaster, I'm not the point of the interview. My guest is. Now I'm the talking head. Now it's about me. So now I have to worry about, what do I wear?
Gotta get your hair cut, man.
I gotta get my hair cut. I gotta make sure my tan is still good. What's the background, sound quality, video quality. There's so many different pieces of the puzzle, technical pieces, that have to be considered. Luckily, my daughter's my producer, and she is in the entertainment business. She's a song and dance person. She's been in a lot of plays and this and that, so she's a performer.
Nice.
So what's great about that is, she'll always, smile, stand up straight, shoulders bang. She gives me, the stuff
we need that. Yeah, we need that.
Absolutely. And it's great, so having her involved, and she does the filming, and so there's been a lot of learning around that, and now we have a production company that's putting the sizzle reel together, and so we're getting more information about how the shot should be framed, those kinds of things. Lighting is really important. So when we go out to do outside shoots, we're always doing them either pretty early in the morning or late in the afternoon, because the light is better. So there's just, because it's visual, there's so many more things. If it's just my voice, that's one thing. But because it's visual, there's just a lot of other pieces of the puzzle to think about. And I've gotten pretty good at audio editing on the podcast. Video editing, I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. I'm gonna let somebody else do that. It's just one thing too many. And my joke is, I'm the talent. I'm just I'm just a guy, that is putting the show on. Somebody else has got to do the technical stuff.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah, there's been a number of things we've learned. We talked to a couple of different production companies, and we decided to use one that had some success in putting sizzle reels together and getting shows approved, figuring that was, kind of really important. So we've been really, I raised, some money to be able to do this. We've been actively working on it since around Christmas, so not quite a month. We should have our sizzle reel done in March. We're hoping it'll get picked up, and we'll be able to start doing production on the filming, in the summer. That's our
Beautiful
schedule.
Beautiful. I respect it. I'm pulling for you, man.
Thank you.
Hopefully I turn on Netflix one of these days and can show my children, hey, I know that guy.
You're right there first. And I got to say, and I appreciate the platform, because this is really the first time I'm kind of announcing it in kind of a broad brush. open source kind of manner. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the platform.
Oh, for sure, for sure. A couple questions before we let you get out of here.
Yeah.
You've been at this for some years. What is the personal and professional development regimen like for Paul? How do you keep showing up better and better after year?
I am a lifelong learner. I find it fascinating to talk to people who are smarter than me and teach me something every day. That to me is the most kind of entertaining, interesting thing that I do. And whether it's doing my own research about things, or I find every podcast I learn something new, something I didn't know. And so that is really, for me, the most important thing. And as we talked about, when I first started working back in the early 80s, I always developed like a 5-year plan. Like, I want to be here in 5 years. And then what would happen is I would hit my goal in 2 years. I'm like, okay, what do I do now? And so I always had a goal in mind, the next thing I was going to do, well before I was finished what I was already doing. And a friend of mine advised me one time. She said, never run away from something, always run towards something. So I took that as this idea of having a goal, and everything I would do to, would be looking at getting me in that direction. And maybe the goal didn't stay exactly the same, but as long as I had a direction I was going in, it really made me feel useful and like I was making progress.
Okay, I like it. Let's say you're commissioned to put up a billboard. This billboard, let's say you're in Southern California. Let's say at LAX, most traffic part of LA. What ask of your community in regards to water would you put on this billboard?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say, be aware, of all things water, whether it's, ocean water pollution, people, throwing their, doggy doo-doo bags down the storm drain, that kind of stuff. Or, how much water you use on your lawn, or, just being aware, like of the fires, that if it rains a lot one year, this stuff's going to grow, and sooner or later it's not going to rain, which means there's going to be a fire. And kind of just be aware of, what's going on and how water affects everything. I was out in the Central Valley in California, doing some filming, and we stopped at a lot of different agricultural facilities. And if you ever spend any time in the Central Valley, where your food comes from. Whereas if you just go to the grocery store, you don't really know where your food comes from. So be aware of all of it, all of those things, because water affects everything. And, that's really, I think that would be the one message I would want people just to keep on top of mind.
Yeah. Okay. Let's say I'm coming to town. I'm coming to your part of Southern California. I text you ahead of time. I say, Paul, where can I get the best burger in your part of town? Where are you going to send me?
So down on the Pacific Coast Highway, there's a place called the Encinitas Ale House. And you would think it's a, kind of a brew pub kind of place. They have, I don't know, 60 or 80 beers on tap, and fabulous beer. I'm not a beer drinker, but fabulous beer. But they make the best hamburger in the world. It hands down. It's great. The cook is fabulous. So it's a little hole in the wall place. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 8 tables.
Yeah.
It's really small.
Yeah.
You sit outside, and you get yourself a beer and a burger.
PCH,
Ain't nothing better than that, man.
You can't be PCH eating a burger, man. I miss it. I miss it. All right, Paul, where can people find more about you at? And then how can people support in, I guess, whatever efforts you have going on?
Sure. So I'm at our website is thewaterentrepreneur.org. Anybody can contact us at thewaterentrepreneur@gmail.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Spotify, and Apple. We just started a YouTube channel. So we're on most of the different social media platforms. If anybody's interested, reach out to me in any of those manners. If you're interested in being a guest, if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or the TV show, feel free to call. But that's the best. I get most of the connections I get are either through the website or LinkedIn.
Gotcha.
Those are the platforms that, and I'll put a shout out for LinkedIn. I really think from a technical community perspective,
yeah,
it's really a fabulous platform. Most, I don't know if it controls itself to any degree and keeps down kind of the noise, the things that shouldn't be on it. But I find it a very, it's after my 4 emails, that's the 5th thing I look at every morning.
Yeah. Likewise. LinkedIn for me is probably, I don't know, the second most used website I go to besides like my Gmail account. So it's how I talk to my people. It's how I reach people. It's how I correspond. I've, set proposals and done deals through LinkedIn. So it's huge.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, Paul. Well, once again, thanks for hopping on the Public Works Podcast. For all the listeners out there, share this with somebody who you think needs to hear it. Share this with somebody who's trying to start up their own startup in the water space. Paul can get them going in the right direction. Tell them if they got an ugly baby or not. And thank you for everybody for tuning in. This has been the Public Works Podcast.